Hey everyone, in today's episode of the Security Swarm podcast, I've got Eric Siron back on the show, and today is one of our monthly threat report episodes. So we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about some industry statistics from our data from over the last month, and then we're going to spend some time talking about major news items that have happened in the cybersecurity space over the last month. We spend some time talking about the takedown of Lockbit and their quick re-emergence. We spend some time talking about the major ransomware attack on Optum/Change Healthcare, which has brought pharmacy operations here in the United States to a grinding halt. And we spend some time talking about the CVSS 10 score that was received by a vulnerability in ConnectWise Screenconnect and how that is impacting the MSP space. That and lots more coming up on today's episode of the Security Swarm podcast. Hey everyone, welcome back for another episode of the Security Swarm podcast, the podcast that brings you the knowledge and insights straight from the security lab here at Hornetsecurity. As always, I'm your host, Andy Syrewicze, and I've got Eric Siron with me today. How's it going, Eric?
Doing well. How are you doing?
Doing good. So it's time for another one of our monthly threat report episodes, Eric. And, you know, I figure being as you were, I think it was last month you were with us on this particular episode as well, for the February monthly threat report. Thought it'd be fun to have you come back and talk about it this month as well too. And there is a specific piece of news that has been flying around the interwebs this past month that, given your healthcare IT background, I think I'm really looking forward to your thoughts and opinions on. So, but what do you think? Should we start with the data and the findings? Well, I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit here. You know, I want to make sure I give you a chance to kind of introduce yourself in the off chance we have listeners out there that may not know who you are. So take it away, sir.
Hi, I'm Eric Siron. I am a Microsoft awarded MVP for Cloud and Datacenter Management. Andy has kind of let in that I work a lot with healthcare industry, so fairly familiar with that, and also work with legal and some other kind of related areas. And I focus on the smaller customers and medium-sized ones I feel like don't get the attention from their providers that a lot of the larger companies do.
I appreciate that, Eric. Yeah, the SMB space is definitely underrepresented. I would definitely agree with that. I mean, even back in my MSP days, I mean, the SMB space was always the little guy in terms of representation and budget, and you know, a lot of them had the same problems as large enterprise organizations do when it comes to IT. And anyway, I'm sensing a future episode here. SMB security versus enterprise security. I mean, there's big differences, but there's a lot of similarities too. Anyway, I'm rambling and getting ahead of myself. So I get excited about a new episode idea, and I can't help myself. Anyway, back on task here, Andy. So I want to start with by covering our main data points that we cover every month in this. And unlike previous monthly episodes where we focus on our monthly data, where we discuss each data point and discuss it, I'm just going to go through the four main data points all at once here, and then we'll discuss it that way. Makes it a little bit more streamlined, and we can spend a little bit more time on the monthly news, the monthly cybersecurity news, which, if everybody's been paying attention, it's been a very busy month in the cybersecurity news space. So anyway, starting with our data. So in terms of the email security landscape, we saw a very slight decrease in the amount of email threats this month. So we always see a peak around the holidays, and then it slowly disperses and gets back to, what we could call as, I dare say it, normal email threat landscape. But there was still a slight decrease this month, almost negligible. That said, the email security landscape remains dangerous. In terms of the top file types that were used for the delivery of malicious payloads, no surprises here. PDF, HTML, and archive files are the top three choices for threat actors in that area. The top three targeted industry verticals this month were mining, manufacturing, and media organizations. And then when we talk about impersonated brands in email attacks, during this data period, the top impersonated brands were FedEx, DHL, and Facebook. So that's our core data this month. If you're interested in more details around that, check in the show notes. I will put a link to the actual written reports, which will have all the nitty-gritty details. It shows you all the math and statistics and all that lovely stuff. So, but Eric, is there any standout information here that is surprising to you? Anything you want to make sure we talk about before there's 1 or 2 points I want to make here, but I want to give the floor to you first.
Well, realistically, I guess it's kind of nice, I guess, to see it more or less looking like it has.
Right.
And not like, oh, we've discovered some new major hole that now we're after. So it's sort of no news is good news. And as far as your overall charts, and of course, like you said, this has been a busy month, but it doesn't seem like the game has changed in any way. And I think that's kind of
right. I would agree with that. And I mean, in terms of changes, I think the only thing here that has changed, and it was like this last month too, in that for the longest time, we saw DHL as the most impersonated brand, not by just a little bit, but by like a large margin until about 2 months ago. And we saw that shift to FedEx now. DHL is still in the second spot. It's still heavily impersonated in terms of, impersonation attacks, but FedEx is right up there. And I'm always asked, like, okay, why are shipping brands always so high in the list? Well, I say it every time I talk about this on the show, like, how many packages do you have showing up at your house on a daily basis or to your business? Or I know my house here, we probably have stuff showing up on the doorstep 4 or 5 days a week. I mean, we order paper towel and have it delivered now, so threat actors know that there's a large number of shipping notices and stuff. And I think the other surprising one here is Facebook. So Facebook usually makes it into the top 10, but it's been unusual to see them at number 3, right? And part of me wonders, Eric, I don't remember exactly when it was. It was a month or 2 back. Do you remember the news about the Moab, the mother of all breaches? Do you remember hearing about that in the news?
I do.
And, the cybersecurity community kind of rallied together and looked at that. And on the surface, it looks like, okay, doesn't appear to be any new information in that particular breach. It looks like it's just a collection of a number of different breaches. But whenever there's a large breach like that, it never surprises me when we see things like increased brand impersonation or, password stuffing attacks, things of that nature, right? So
You're getting more eyes on data, even though it was already out there. You're getting more eyes on it.
correct, right? Maybe it's more
marketing for the bad guys,
right, exactly. It's more searchable. It's more contained. I mean, you look at our enterprise systems, right? Of course, we're going to try to streamline things and make it easier. And the one thing I've learned in the cybersecurity space over the last several years is like and I always feel weird saying this, they really operate like they are a business. I mean, that's really what it comes down to it. And it's strange to see. The other thing that I wanted to call out here before we move on to our, kind of the main part of today's conversation, the news stuff, is the top targeted industries. Mining has long been on the list, as well as manufacturing and media. I guess I have thoughts on all 3 of these. Mining and manufacturing are industries that have very little regulation, right? Eric, you and I were talking about this just before we hit record. Both of those industries, unless you're in some regulated supply chain, and the one that always comes up to me here in the States is the Department of Defense, right? If you're involved in the Department of Defense supply chain in any way, shape, or form, you have to adhere to ITAR and CMMC regulations. Outside of that, I can't think of many regulated industries that they would have to adhere to. So they're not held to the same scrutiny as like a healthcare organization, right?
Digitally, they're not. Now,
correct.
If you get a couple of them on here, they're going to be upset that you said that.
Yeah, I know. Right. But digitally, that's a valid point. Digitally, correct. Yep.
which is what we're concerned about here. So let's clarify that. Just,
That's a good point. So if I've offended anyone, my apologies. So that's funny. Our buddy Paul Schneckenberg and I think it was 2 or 3 episodes ago, I think we joked that we had upset our Linux listeners and what other, oh, I forget the other group. We were talking about security through the prism of the recent midnight blizzard situation at Microsoft. For those folks that are interested in um, anything about midnight blizzard or Paul and I making jokes, I'll put a link to that episode in the show notes. Anyway, I'm off the rails again. But to your point, Eric, definitely. The mining and manufacturing space digitally do not have as stringent as requirements as many other organizations. And I think the interesting one of these three is the media industry. And we've seen this risen to the top of near the top of the impersonation lists. It's kind of slowly been moving its way up the list. And I would attribute that partially due to upcoming elections, right? Um, I have to imagine threat actors are trying to sow disinformation, try to plug themselves into those conversations, and use those conversations to make inroads into target organizations or people's accounts. Right? Any thoughts on that before we move on to the news items, Eric?
well, yeah, they've got the money and they've got the analytics. I mean, if you're trying to break something, media's a pretty good way to go.
Right. Yeah.
And I think there's the same issue there that, and I don't know a whole lot about that industry. It's one of the few I haven't really worked in, but I would imagine they haven't got a huge amount of digital regulation either. There's no HIPAA, there's no ITAR, there's nothing like that applies to media that I'm aware of. So, I mean,
You
they
know
have.
what? That's a really good point. I had one organization that I used to do some work for back in my MSP days. That I guess you could classify into that media industry bucket, right? But thinking about them, I can't imagine that they would have had all that many regulations either. That would be really interesting to find out. Any of our listeners out there, if you work in the media space, I would love to find out more about that. If you've got any comments or interesting stories around that particular data points, drop me an email at Andy at Hornetsecurity.com. And yeah, we'll definitely share that in a future episode. I'd be really interested to hear about that. Anyway, should we talk about news? It's been a busy news cycle.
It has been.
It's been a very busy news cycle. And when I sat down to write this report this month, I went to my team, the security lab team, right? And I'm like, guys, it has been an insanely busy security news cycle this month. I'm like, I'm going to cover these 3 items as our primary items. Is there any? I'm like, there's been so many things that I haven't been able to keep track of them all. But I found, in my opinion, these were 3 of the biggest ones. So we're going to talk about Lockbit briefly. We're going to talk about the ConnectWise Screenconnect CVSS 10. Yes, a 10 CVSS score on that one. We're going to talk about that vulnerability. And then, Eric, the one I'm really looking forward to getting your thoughts on are the ransomware attack on Optum / Change Healthcare / United Health, right? I kind of see those 3 names being used interchangeably when the news has been talking about that attack. But starting with Lockbit, not a ton to report here, but interesting all the same. Lockbit has been a very prolific ransomware group out on the interwebs for some time now, right? They've made a lot of high-profile attacks. And this one is strange. So the FBI and other international law enforcement agencies conducted a combined takedown of Lockbit, right? Like if you remember back when the QuakeBot botnet was removed. Remember the headlines, right? There were headlines everywhere. Big announcements were made, a lot of pageantry, which there should be. That was a big deal,
Yes.
this felt very much along the same vein. And initially it was like, okay, cool. Lockbit, the ransomware group, has been, heavily impacted. That's good news. Well, a couple days went by and Lockbit was like, yep, no, we're still here. And so they were impacted. And then apparently they had enough infrastructure left elsewhere that they're back and encrypting things again. New encryptors were spotted out in the wild. New attacks were already spotted out in the wild. And man, I don't know. It's like, um, whack-a-mole. You smack one mole and two more pop up, right? So they're keeping us on our feet. I mean, it's good news that law enforcement was able to impact their operations in some way, but I don't know. I've been talking about this alone so far. Eric, what are your thoughts?
I don't know that I'm thinking much different than you are. I do have concerns with that level of coordination. Either it's it's a lot easier to get away with this than I thought. It's a lot harder for the feds to track down every last little part than I thought. Or this is like a very well funded organization, and you're starting to get into like nation state actors at this point.
That's a good
So
point.
I have some concerns there on, yeah, is there more? Is this an iceberg of a story? And you just broke
That's
off.
a good point. That's a good point. And I have to believe. So, I mean, when the feds, and this won't be the only time we're talking about the feds on this episode. We'll be coming back to that term, the feds. Funny story. Anyway, when the feds coordinate a takedown like this, where I have to believe that in order to be effective, they've identified, okay, these are our IP addresses, these are our host names, these are our servers. Like, I mean, it's like cut the head off the snake right now, do it now so it doesn't grow back, right? And
Yes, what
so,
I understand about these sorts of operations is they're not going to bite the instant they find something. They're going to
yep,
wait and say, we have collected this mountain. We're gonna get it all at once.
yep.
And for them to miss that much of it, that's why I'm concerned.
It is very interesting. So it makes you wonder how things were missed, or if Lockbit had, infrastructure, you know, either disconnected or powered off or just lying in wait somewhere. They planned on being taken down. I don't know. I'm tinfoil hatting here, but
A little bit, but at the same time, this is literally what we train legitimate companies to do.
very true.
You just don't have a section in there on how to get by when half of your staff has been arrested. That's really the difference. Otherwise, it's the same approach.
Right.
So, but again, the level of coordination necessary to make this happen, that's a little unsettling.
For sure. For sure. So, I mean, that's basically what we know at this point. This is a story that I'm going to keep an eye on as we move into April's monthly threat report. I get the feeling this is one we're gonna be reporting on for a little while. So we'll return back with more details next month. The next one I want to get into, and I'm sure all of our MSP listeners have learned all about this particular one, and I would love to hear your stories on dealing with this particular issue. Again, Andy at Hornetsecurity.com. I'd love to share some of those stories, but we're talking about the, again, CVSS 10 vulnerability in the very popular ConnectWise Screenconnect application. Now, if you're unfamiliar with what Screenconnect is, it is one of those stereotypical remote access utilities, right? So I'm an MSP. I've got 50 different customers that are geographically spread out, and I'm doing some sort of all you can eat support model, right? You, Mr. Customer, are paying me X amount per person per workstation to provide support. Bob in accounting at company X, calls up and says, hey, I'm having a problem. Please help. Me as the support agent, I log into Bob's machine using Screenconnect, and away I go. Now, that solution I shouldn't say that solution specifically, but remote access solutions like ScreenConnect have really enabled that MSP model, right? It doesn't make sense for MSPs to scramble boots on the ground every time somebody's printer doesn't work, right? So that's where this remote access software really comes into play. To me, that's also why it makes it kind of dangerous. And when this particular vulnerability came out, and I'm interested to get your thoughts on this, Eric, for the first time, I think, in my career, again, I come from the MSP world. I'm very used to this model. For the first time in my career, I asked myself the question, from a security standpoint, does it really make sense to have remote access software running and available on every single machine at all times? That was, it's the first time I've ever really questioned that. And I mean, we haven't always lived in an era where threat actors are always trying to find the next supply chain attack, right? They've happened before, but not with the frequency that we're seeing now. So when I see a CVSS 10 vulnerability in an application like ScreenConnect, I'm thinking like, okay, here we go, buckle up. This is the next supply chain attack. I start asking questions like that, and to ConnectWise's, to their, what's the word I'm thinking of? To their credit, that's the word I'm thinking of. To ConnectWise's credit, they did a really good job of saying, "Hey, we messed up, big vulnerability. We've already taken care of those cloud instances of ScreenConnect. But those of you that are running ScreenConnect on premise, here's this patch. Install it now, not tomorrow, not the day after. Do it right now." Like right now, stop reading, go install the patch right now. They were really good about that. And the security community, the channel community was really good about coming together and helping to spread that awareness. Now, Eric, I think this is not the first time you and I have talked about the situation, but there will always be that one or two, or in this case, more than that. But there's always going to be those organizations that they don't get the message, or for whatever reason, they drag their feet, or in this case, let's say the guy that knows about the ScreenConnect server sitting over in the corner was let go or left, and they forget about it. There's always those fringe cases, right? So yeah, thoughts.
I will tell you now that remote always on is going to make every single person security minded in healthcare that I have ever met just like, no.
Oh yeah.
I mean, no. And I've also encountered vendors who are like, no remote connect, no support. And there's always this huge standoff, and it's terrible. And I've seen a lot of solutions architected to take this forced connect, always connect machine and put it in its own little universe, where the security guy can just pull the plug and and keep it from bouncing around and all that. And we get back to the old thing of security is always a trade-off of convenience versus protection. And so with stuff like this, and I want to really acknowledge your question of, does this make sense anymore? And I'm not certain it ever did, to be honest with you, to have an always on connected thing. The bulk of the convenience here for something like this is for the MSP, the one who's getting paid,
right?
Not the customer. And yes, you know what? I've been in this game a long time, and I do remember when we would ask our clients to install PC Anywhere on their machine. They had to have a modem on it, and then you've got some poor little old lady who has no idea what you're talking about, and you're trying to get through this whole thing of connect that to PC Anywhere, and the phone number? No, I don't. Okay, I don't have a cell phone yet. I don't have ubiquitous caller ID. I don't have all the things I have. I know this frustration. I feel it. I get it. Yeah. But you can't lower your security to get around that, because ultimately this poor little lady's frustrated, but 15, 20 minutes, I got her, right? Yeah. So now you're looking at, from the MSP side, my agents spending 15 or 20 minutes per customer to get them connected. I'll just do this ConnectWise thing. At what cost? At what ultimate cost?
Right.
And my big thing is, I don't ever want to have to write a breach notice. And if I ever do, I want to be able to say, I wasn't doing anything stupid. I just got beat, right?
Right.
And if I'm saying, well, I have this always on connection that I use a 0.5% of the time that it's connected, but it's always there in open channel for somebody to breach. That's not the breach notice I want to write.
Right.
I hope I'm making sense here. I think this is something that we need to re-examine this, that, okay, the convenience and the threat no longer balance.
Right.
And personally, I don't believe they ever did. But if
Right.
we're at a place where we started doing dollars and cents, and actually, no, they don't
Yeah.
balance.
I'm the same as you. I guess I've always accepted that model because, like I said, I kind of grew up as an IT person in that model. So I totally understand the need. And I want to make sure I acknowledge the fact, and maybe I should have led with this. I want to acknowledge the fact that that persistent, always on, just connect whenever mode is not always the default. So you can configure it. Now, I want to put the disclaimer out there. I am not super familiar with ScreenConnect. I'm speaking about remote connectivity software in general, but most remote connection software gives you the ability to configure varying levels of access, right? You have that whole hog, always on, connect when you need type of mode, but you can also configure it in ways that, like, okay, hey, you need the current logged in user's permission. They get a pop-up like, hey, so-and-so's trying to connect to your machine. Yes, there are various ways of configuring, but I think the point still stands. Because going back to that MSP model, another very common tool that is in play in most MSPs is your RMM tool, right? Your remote management and monitoring solution. And most of those solutions have the ability to do things like modify the registry or run scripts or access the command line without having to do that remote session, right? So should that solution be compromised, the threat actor still has that same level of access needed, which comes back to the original point.
And they
Should
have
we?
the drop. That is the bigger
Right.
issue. I will only ever accept the model. And ideally, no remote access ever. That's the ideal, but it's not
Right.
practical. And the convenience cost is too high. So that's not going to happen. I will only accept a model where I'm the customer, I call the provider, and the provider says, take steps A, B, C, D, and I'm going to send you a message, and then you're going to let me connect it. It always needs to be initiated by the customer, going to a known point of contact, and then they need to accept everything, and then it needs to be logged.
Yeah.
All of this. And I would not, and I get sometimes, oh, well, we want to patch in the middle of the night. Maybe you need to rethink your patching structure if your guy needs to connect in remotely to patch my stuff. I mean, we've got all these. There's so many issues going on here that this is just this just can't be the way we do things.
Yeah.
And if it is, then we have to accept that we've lowered our customer safety for our own convenience.
Yeah. And I think we've learned in the last several years, especially, there is no perfect system. It does not exist. And
No,
I love to quote Steve Gibson on this. For those that don't know, Steve Gibson, he very prolific security professional, been around forever. He's part of the Security Now podcast. He's out at grc.com is his website. He explains it perfectly when we're talking about things like this. And he's like, okay, when we're talking about security, and this is verbatim, this is not his exact quote, but something along the lines of, like, when we're talking about security, if you want to make sure that you are communicating a message securely, the only surefire way to do it is have two people go into the middle of a barren field, take all their clothes off, hide underneath a blanket, and whisper in each other's ear. That's the
even
only
that, I'm sure somebody will figure a way around.
Or bug the blanket or something, right? Like,
Yeah, we got those big. What are one of the gigantic microphones, and I can.
the
Go
the
figure.
point
Anyway,
being, there is no perfect system, right?
there's
And I
not.
mean, the industry, not the security industry, but business in general, I feel like over the last 5 years has started treating MFA as this magic silver bullet. It's not. It's great. Don't get me wrong. You should be using it. It makes threat actors' jobs more difficult. It doesn't solve all the problems, though. For example, I did a webinar about 6 weeks ago. I'll put a link to it in the show notes, where I actually demoed a adversary in the middle attack, siphoning off somebody's M365 session token, and then injecting the session token into a web browser and logging in as that user while bypassing MFA. So it's
Well, that's scary.
yeah. And I think the thing that really shocked me, and I keep saying this, I should not be surprised anymore. I was shocked at how easy it was to set up and do. Anyway, I'll put a link to that in the show notes. That way
Because the
people
machines are configured for convenience and access, and then
Yep.
we put a layer of security around that. And I can sit here in my little chair and tell you, oh, here's all these thoughts on the ways to. No, this is hard. This is hard stuff.
It is. Yep.
You have to decide, am I going to authenticate you every single time you make a transmission? Because that's one option.
Yep.
You'll probably quit using M365 if you do that. But yeah,
That's one option. That's true.
yeah. At the end of the day, it's a digital stream, and if you get the bits right, you're in.
Yep, exactly, for sure. Well, Eric, we've got about 5-10 minutes left here, and I want to make sure that we dive into this topic. Our last news item to cover for this episode is the Optum / Change Healthcare / United Health ransomware attack. I've seen all of those used interchangeably. United Health is the big, huge, overarching conglomerate that owns Change Healthcare, and Change Healthcare is part of a subsidiary known as Optum. If I don't have those associations entirely correct, my apologies, but all the news articles I've been reading about this particular case, they seem to be using them all interchangeably. Anyway, what this attack amounts to is that this organization, Change Healthcare, suffered a debilitating ransomware attack. And it is unclear yet as to how the threat actors initially gained access into the organization. I should say unclear as of the time of this recording. And initially, it was theorized that it was associated with this CVSS 10 ScreenConnect vulnerability, which the threat actors themselves and some behind-the-scenes experts associated with the investigation, they've both debunked those claims. I'm more likely to believe the experts that are doing the investigation than I am the ransomware gang. Anyway, so as of this stage, we don't know what the initial point of infection was. Now, if you're unfamiliar with this particular organization, Change Healthcare, and Eric, correct me if I'm wrong here, you probably are more knowledgeable about this piece of it than I am with your healthcare IT background. Change Healthcare, to my knowledge, is a system that is used as kind of the intermediary between doctors, pharmacists, pharmaceutical companies. It kind of is the processing unit that sits between all of them, so that when I go to the pharmacy here in the US, I say, hey, I've got a prescription for medication A. They run the prescription through Change Healthcare, verifies that I am covered on insurance, and that I can pay for, insurance can pay for the medication. Without this service, I would have to pay full price for the medication. And for our European listeners and our non-US listeners, I could go on about this, but I will just say medications in the US can be very expensive, very expensive unless you run it through your medical insurance. So what this has effectively done is this has brought those pharmacy related operations to a screeching halt across the entire US. And I'm not sure what the exact market share is, but from my understanding in the articles I've read, Change Healthcare had a astronomically large share of the market in this particular function. And so without it, it had wide-reaching impacts. And I will say that even my own family has been impacted by this. There is a medication that someone in my family thankfully can get by with if they need to, but they haven't been able to get a hold of that medication because they can't utilize this processing function currently. But that's what the impact has been. Eric, I'm hoping I covered that correctly.
You covered that very well.
Oh, I appreciate that. Good. So anyway, the plot thickened a little bit after the initial reports. This went on for a week and a half, roughly, time-wise speaking. And people who were watching and in the know in the cryptocurrency space were able to determine that the threat actors behind this attack, it looked like wallets associated with those threat actors received a $22 million payment. And to make things even weirder, that organization, the threat actors associated with the attack, it seems like they ghosted the affiliate, which I have a really weird time with this wording. It's just strange to me. The affiliate in the threat actor world is the threat actor party that brought the attack chain to the ransomware gang. Well, the ransomware gang, they ransom Change Healthcare, got their $22 million payment, and then ghosted the affiliate, didn't give them any share of the money. And then to try and avoid blame for not giving their affiliates any money, which for the record, I don't feel bad for the affiliate in this case, just for the record. The threat actor group responsible for this attack put up basically the Fed takedown notice, like, oh, our stuff has been taken down by the US federal government, trying to make it seem like they had been taken down, where there were, I don't remember who, but there were law enforcement entities that basically said, like, yeah, not us. So we have an attack, we have a large sum of money here, we have far-reaching impacts in the general population, and then we have drama behind the scenes with the threat actor group, and then fake US federal law enforcement takedown. I mean, like, this sounds like a novel or something. I like
the bad guys turning on each other. Who saw that coming?
All right, that never happens. There
should be a law.
Right. So I think the key thing that I take away from this attack, and the one thing that is really surprising to me, Eric, is when we look at past far-reaching attacks like this, and the one that always comes to mind for me is the ransomware attack on Colonial Pipeline, right? Where the Colonial Pipeline was impacted, and it impacted oil delivery on the eastern U.S. seaboard, right? This one feels like an escalation for me because if it hasn't happened yet, this has the potential to kill someone, essentially.
Yes. I'm absolutely certain there are going to be very bad outcomes because of it.
Yeah. I was talking to a pharmacist about the issue I mentioned earlier, right? My family being impacted by this.
Mm-hmm.
Pharmacist, we were just talking about this, and there was mention that, okay, yeah, diabetes drugs are not getting to people because if they can't process the insurance, I have no idea what the cost of diabetes medication is. I know it's extremely high. So now you have people not getting their diabetes medication. That's bad.
I was thinking, you're talking about your family member. What if that was my heart med I couldn't get?
Exactly. And so I feel like it is such an escalation because there is a real human cost in this attack.
Yeah.
And I think my other kind of thought around this attack before I pass it over to you, Eric, is I think this has really showcased how brittle the digital systems in our healthcare ecosystem is. And if I was a threat actor, I would be going after every single medical organization I could find right now, trying to find another one like this. And so I will pass the floor to you, my friend. So I would love to hear your healthcare IT thoughts on this one. This is a doozy.
I think we're a little bit lucky in that I'm sure they're doing exactly what you said, but I'm also sure they have been probing those defenses for a long time.
Right.
And most of your medical industry, if for no other reason because they are legally mandated to, are going to have pretty strong defenses. It'll be interesting if we ever learn how they got in here, what that I want to know. And I think most of the world is going to want to know, what did they actually do? Because I don't think that was either that was a very large feat or somebody got really lucky. Somebody left some little doorway open, and that's all it took, obviously.
Right.
So I think your typical threat actors, and we've said this before, if they had any real ambition, they would be working real jobs and making their money legitimately.
Right.
They're going to go after the low-hanging fruit, the most money for the least effort. That is what they're going to do. And that, a lot of the things you're looking at when they're targeting, it's because they don't, the companies are kind of operating in the same way. It's like, well, the law doesn't say I have to protect this, so I have other things to do with my investments.
Right.
It's not going to be that. I mean, one of the reasons we talk about healthcare being expensive in the USA is we spend a lot of money on defense. Huge. And your other companies, like, if they don't have to, they're not going to want to do that. Right.
Right.
So basically what I'm getting at is, for better or for worse, healthcare is going to last longer than most other. But again, it's a matter of time. Right. And it was inevitable. Somebody was going to get broken into. This was going to happen. And the other part, as we were kind of talking about the nature of this attack, like, you go to a lot of hospitals and they have like breathing monitors and things that are network connected and sending all this, and those have really big walls around them. But the hospitals,
they should.
Oh yeah, they're huge. They're huge. They know. But the hospitals are more or less prepared for a cyber attack, and that, like, okay, if this gets damaged, it's going to be an all hands on deck sort of situation, but we can manage. We'll get around that.
Right.
I need to be careful how far I go with that, because obviously the more technology builds up. But for things like, is the patient breathing, right? We can disconnect that equipment. We can pull it out. We can keep it functioning. We have manual ways to work on a lot of the stuff. What you're talking about is a completely different game, and I don't know how many people have put as much thought into it as they had, for instance, a heart monitor, right? Because if I prevent you from getting your pills, I don't kill you instantly,
right?
Like I do if I shut off your ventilator or something like that. So, and I don't know. I am not in. I'm at the more on the outside where we have pharmacies in our loop, but I don't, a lot of them work with more specific digital providers that know that industry in and out. And it's very well shielded. There's a lot of effort put in here to keep this data safe.
Right.
So, but that kind of means also I don't have the insights to that I might otherwise. But I can actually see how somebody would be like, well, it's, the pills are still being made. They're still on the shelves. They're still being shipped. Are we actually, how risky is this? And well, yeah, it turns out it's a really big risk.
It's a big deal, right? I guess I look at it as, just like any industry, there are areas that are more sensitive than others. So in this case, I would equate like the breathing machine to like the bank vault, whereas the pharmacy processing mechanism is like the bank lobby, right? Both important. One obviously requires more security than the other, right? So it's an interesting and unfortunate situation, I will say. And we could do a whole episode on this as well. I think it sets a very bad precedent for them to have paid the $22 million. I
agree, but they may have just felt like we're there. It's and you get to a cost benefit analysis of, on paper, I'm going to pay this money and this is what's going to happen versus I'm not going to pay this money and this is the level of effort we're going to have to put into for recovery. And if you only look at it from that regard, the math might have been real easy.
Right.
But let's always get back to this. A lot of times they take your money and they don't unlock you. And this is, we've known this, you've known this. I know you've spoken about this in the past. But when you're sitting there with an accountant who's like, we need to do something. We have to do something.
Right.
And for all we know, that money's insured anyway, and they're going to get it back. So they pass the buck. I don't know. I have no idea. I'm just.
We're theorizing.
Theorizing. Yes.
And to your point, I didn't mention this when I explained the attack earlier. It gets a little stranger with the whole affiliate threat actor relationship in that the affiliate publicly came out and said, hey, we brought this attack to the threat actor. They ghosted us. Well, guess what? We're still sitting on 6 terabytes of Change Healthcare data. So we've got double extortion going on now, right?
Yeah.
So it's like, okay. And this is, again, where it sets a bad precedent. They paid the ransomware group, but now they have this other entity that's like, hey, we still have your data. You know, I don't know.
In a lot of ways, this is self-reported too. How do we know that this affiliate is the only actor? Do we actually know that for a fact, that they're not, let's make this scapegoat that doesn't actually exist, blame them, and get paid twice?
Right. Exactly. Maybe that's it. Maybe that could be.
But even then, even if that's not the case, even if that isn't, even if there are 2 people and one stabbed the other in the back, I don't trust the affiliate either.
Yeah, exactly.
So I have no reason to believe that they're going to unlock it if they get the money. So
exactly.
This is the whole problem: is you can't trust. You cannot trust the people who are stealing from you.
Yeah, it's a bad situation all around. So again, this is going to be one we're going to be talking about for a while, I think. So we'll circle back to it at some point. But Eric, we're at 45 minutes, so we're over our usual time. But I want to thank you for taking your time out of your day to come and share your knowledge and insight with us. It's always fun having you, my friend.
Always a good time. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, definitely. And those of you watching, thanks for spending some time with us. If you found value in today's episode, be sure to hit that like and subscribe button if you're watching on YouTube. Otherwise, you can catch our show on all the major podcasting platforms, so you can find us pretty much anywhere you would like to consume your content. With that, we will let you get back to your day. Stay safe out there. Have a good one. And we'll catch you next week for another episode of the Security Swarm Podcast. Catch you later.